irrespective of whether you think this is a good thing or a bad thing, it clearly involves a radical change in our conception of what a right is. A right becomes a claim that we can each make against each other. Of course, then this tends to undermine people's sense that there really is any objective authority to the idea of a right. When somebody comes along and says to me that he has a certain claim against me, even though there is no relationship, I tend to think of that as nonsense. And so this confusion about the idea of human rights means that there's a considerable amount of nonsense embedded in our legal systems.
Right. In a political order sort of founded on this idea, where rights are sort of dictated or coming from the state, if you feel like you're a victim of nonsense, what can you appeal to?
It's a very good question. And people, let me give you an interesting case. In my country, we have a very important tradition of planning law, which arose from between the wars, but was solidified after the Second World War, according to which you cannot build houses in the countryside, not without very special permission, because people valued the countryside. We're, as you know, an overcrowded little island, and wanted to preserve it. And this law creates certain duties on the part of the citizen to obey it, not to build just anywhere, anyhow. And people accepted it as a piece of legislation. It doesn't talk about anybody's rights. It just talks about what duties are under the law. But then Irish travellers enjoying freedom of movement under the European Union laws come and settle in our countryside with their caravans, scraping away the topsoil, putting down concrete, and littering the place with these, what you Americans would call trailer parks. Right. And then, of course, this is against the law. But they appeal to the European Court of Human Rights, saying that we have a right, as an ethnic minority, to live in our traditional way. And this is our traditional way. Now, if the court upholds that judgment and says that they do have a right, then all other interests are cancelled by it, because a right is a non-negotiable privilege. Right. Whereas the neighbours of these people just have whatever ordinary legislative rights and duties have been laid down. So the result is that this law is no longer applicable. One thing that happens as a result of that, of course, is that is social tension. Right. Indeed, we've already had a couple of murders in one of these camps as a result of this. Most people don't accept the fact that they, having obeyed the law to maintain the beautiful environment in which they were, can see it just taken away from them by people who don't have to obey the law because they can overreach it through these international courts. But increasingly that is happening, that overreaching of the law through the doctrine of human rights and through these claims that people make, claims to lifestyle and so on.
So you're suggesting that there really is nothing to appeal once you reach a certain state?
Well, this is a technical problem, but in our law, and I think in all laws, if something is a right attaching to an individual, then that's it. Right. The judge is obliged to grant it. Okay. There can be conflicts of rights, but you see, the neighbours of the travellers, in the case I'm considering, didn't have any rights in the matter. Right. They just had interests. Right. So the court had no way of judging in their favour.
Sure. But often laws are made with interest in mind.
Oh yes,
Right.
and that's the whole purpose of legislation,
Right.
that it tries to take all the interests into consideration and find an acceptable compromise solution.
Right.
And that's only one example that I took, but there are plenty that are much more relevant perhaps to life in this part of the world.